Chandeliers glittered like captured stars, spilling golden light over the massive hall. Every corner of the governor's mansion was decorated with silk drapes and flowers imported from places most people only saw in magazines. Music from a live orchestra filled the air, blending with the clinking of crystal glasses and the quiet laughter of the city's most powerful people. But among the wealth, there was one figure who did not belong, at least not in the way others did. Her name was Elena, a young waitress barely in her 20s, dressed in a black and white uniform that was a size too big. Though her uniform was plain, Elena had taken extra care that evening. She had pressed her shirt until no wrinkle showed, tied her hair neatly, and even borrowed a simple silver hairpin from her neighbor just to look a little more polished. She had been working double shifts for weeks just to pay her younger brother's school fees. Tonight's job was supposed to be special. It was the governor's charity gala, the most prestigious event in the state, where millionaires, politicians, and foreign investors gathered. Elena thought that if she worked hard, she might be called back again for more events. Maybe, just maybe, this could be the opportunity to slowly climb out of the endless cycle of poverty. As she carried trays of drinks, Elena walked carefully between the glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos. Her eyes never rose too high, but she smiled softly whenever a guest looked her way. "Good evening, sir. Champagne?" she would say in a gentle voice, and even the coldest businessman seemed to soften at her politeness. She didn't notice that a few of the older guests whispered to one another, impressed not just by her manners, but by the quiet grace in her eyes. Though she was only a waitress, there was something dignified about Elena, something that shone even brighter than the diamonds on the ladies' necks. And someone else noticed too. At the far end of the hall, leaning lazily against a pillar, Clara, the governor's only daughter, watched with narrowed eyes. Clara was 21, spoiled since birth, used to every gaze being on her whenever she entered a room. Tonight, she wore a designer dress worth more than Elena's entire yearly earnings. Yet to her annoyance, some guests were smiling at the waitress instead of her. "Ridiculous," Clara muttered under her breath. "She's just staff." But her irritation grew with each passing moment. Clara was used to being admired, praised, even feared. But now she saw eyes flicker toward Elena, just a poor waitress with nothing but borrowed dignity. It infuriated her. Meanwhile, Elena kept her head down, unaware of the storm brewing in Clara's heart. She thought only of finishing the night well. She silently prayed, "Please, let me just get through this evening without trouble. I can't afford to lose this job." What Elena didn't know was that tonight would not only bring trouble, it would change her life forever. Because in that glittering crowd, one man had already noticed her. A man who wasn't laughing, drinking, or boasting like the others. A man whose sharp gaze was fixed entirely on her. The evening was moving smoothly. Elena floated between the guests like a quiet shadow, carrying trays of sparkling champagne, offering soft smiles, and keeping her eyes lowered in respect. Her heart pounded each time she passed through clusters of laughing people, dressed in riches she could never dream of affording. Still, she told herself, stay calm. Stay professional. Just a few more hours, and you'll earn enough to pay half the school fees. You can't mess this up, Elena. But fate had already chosen her test. Across the ballroom, Clara sipped lazily at her glass of red wine, her perfectly painted lips curved in a smug little smile. She had been watching Elena for too long, noticing how some of the older guests spoke kindly of her. Clara even caught two wealthy businessmen whispering, "That girl has a rare grace, not common in staff." That was the final straw. "How dare they compare me to her?" Clara hissed to her friend, another wealthy girl who nodded eagerly to every word. "She's nothing but a servant, and yet she thinks she can stand here with her head held high?" Clara's eyes burned with envy. She wasn't just annoyed, she was furious. To her, the gala was her stage, her world. No one, especially not a poor waitress, should be stealing attention. The opportunity came when Eleanor walked past Clara's group, carefully balancing a tray with glasses of champagne. Her soft voice rose. "Champagne, miss?" Clara's eyes glinted with cruelty. She tipped her glass of red wine slightly, pretending to stumble. In a sudden sharp motion, the deep crimson liquid spilled forward, straight onto Elena's dress. The sound was small but sharp. The red splash spread across the white part of Elena's uniform like blood on snow. Gasps rose from those nearby. The music continued, but the laughter faltered. Heads turned. For a moment, time froze. Elena stood rigid, staring down at the ruined fabric. She felt heat rise in her face, her chest tightening as though someone had squeezed the air from her lungs. The dress wasn't much. It wasn't designer, it wasn't glamorous. But it was clean, neat, and her pride for the evening. It was the only dress she owned that made her feel presentable among the wealthy. Now, it was destroyed in seconds. "I'm so sorry, miss," Eleanor whispered, her trembling hands fumbling to steady the tray so she wouldn't drop the glasses. Her voice cracked. "I didn't—" But Clara's voice sliced through the silence, sharp and mocking. "Sorry?" Clara laughed loudly, making sure everyone nearby could hear. "You should be. How clumsy can you be, spilling everything on yourself at the governor's gala? My goodness, don't they train staff anymore?" Elena's eyes widened in shock. She hadn't moved wrong. She hadn't made a mistake. But Clara twisted the story before she could even speak. Guests exchanged uncomfortable looks, but no one dared challenge the governor's daughter. Instead, a few forced chuckles rose, though they carried no real humor. Clara smirked, relishing the moment. Elena's throat tightened, tears threatening to rise, but she bit her lip hard. She couldn't cry. Not here, not in front of everyone. That would only give Clara more reason to laugh. She lowered her head and whispered again, I'm truly sorry, miss." Clara leaned closer, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Do you even realize how much this dress costs?" She gestured dramatically to her own gown, covered in crystals. "Probably more than your entire life savings. You don't belong here. Next time, keep out of the way of people who actually matter." Her words cut deeper than the wine stain ever could. Elena's chest burned with humiliation. She wanted the ground to swallow her whole. She wanted to run, but her legs felt rooted to the spot. The laughter of a few shallow guests echoed in her ears, magnifying the pain. She felt like a child again, small, unwanted, powerless. And yet, she didn't see the man watching. From across the room, Mr. Reynolds, the billionaire investor invited as the governor's honored guest, had witnessed every second. He had seen the deliberate tilt of Clara's glass, the cruelty in her eyes, and the trembling dignity in Elena's posture as she tried not to cry. Unlike the others, he didn't laugh. His sharp eyes narrowed. His mind churned. "So, this is the governor's daughter? And that young woman, she doesn't carry herself like a mere servant. There's more to her." Meanwhile, Elena tried to step back, whispering apologies. She excused herself, her hands shaking as she carried the empty tray toward the service doors. Her heart hammered in her chest, shame flooding her veins. "Don't cry here, Elena. Don't let them see you break." But Clara wasn't done. She called out one last cruel jab loud enough for the hall to hear. "Next time, maybe wear something you can afford to ruin, sweetheart." The laughter that followed echoed like knives in Elena's ears. She pushed through the doors and into the dark hallway, finally letting her tears spill. Inside the grand hall, Clara tossed her hair and smiled smugly, believing she had proven her superiority. But she had no idea. Her cruelty hadn't just humiliated a poor waitress. It had awakened the attention of someone powerful enough to turn her world upside down. The orchestra played on, filling the ballroom with elegant notes, But the atmosphere had shifted. Guests tried to return to their conversations, yet the image of the spilled wine lingered in their minds like an uncomfortable shadow. Some shook their heads in disapproval, but quickly forced smiles. No one dared confront the governor's daughter. Clara basked in the silence she had created, standing tall in her glittering dress, convinced she had put Elena in her place. Her laughter rang too loudly, and her friends echoed it nervously, eager to stay in her good graces. To Clara, the moment was nothing but entertainment, a cruel joke at the expense of someone beneath her. But to one man, it was something else entirely. At the far side of the room, Mr. Alexander Reynolds, a billionaire businessman and longtime ally of the governor, had witnessed every detail. Known for his calm authority, Reynolds was not the type to speak unnecessarily. His reputation was built on a sharp eye for character, the kind of judgment that made or broke multi-million-dollar deals. And tonight, his keen gaze was fixed on Clara and Elena. He had seen Clara's deliberate tilt of the glass, the smirk on her lips, and the false accusation that followed. He had seen Elena's trembling dignity as she whispered apologies she didn't owe. More importantly, he had seen her eyes that had fought back tears, eyes that carried both pride and pain, eyes that revealed more strength than most people in that glittering hall possessed. She didn't deserve that, Reynolds thought, his jaw tightening. A girl like her doesn't spill a tray without reason. That stain wasn't her fault, and yet she carried herself with more grace than the governor's daughter herself. Reynolds lifted his glass but didn't drink. Instead, he studied Clara as she boasted to her friends. She laughed about how hilarious it was to embarrass someone so lowly, her voice carrying across the room. Her words struck him as childish, cruel, and deeply concerning. So, this is the young woman the governor has been grooming for society? This is the face of power's next generation? He mused, disappointment flashing in his eyes. Meanwhile, Eleanor had slipped away into the service corridor, her shoulders trembling as she carried her ruined uniform and broken spirit. No one in the main hall seemed to notice her absence. No one, except Reynolds. For a long moment, he considered his next move. He was not a man of impulse. Every action, every word he spoke, was measured and deliberate. But as he thought of Elena crying alone in some dark hallway while Clara strutted around with false pride, something inside him stirred, something protective, something angry. He set his glass down, his eyes never leaving Clara. Across the room, Clara's laughter grew bolder. She noticed the glances from other guests and mistook their discomfort for admiration. In her mind, she had won the night. "Did you see her face?" Clara giggled to her friend, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Pathetic. She looked like she was about to cry. Honestly, I did her a favor. Maybe now she'll remember she's just staff. People like her need to know their place." Her friend, too nervous to disagree, forced a laugh. "You're always right, Clara." "Of course I am," Clara said proudly, twirling her wine glass. "Daddy's gala isn't the place for people like her. Can you imagine someone actually noticing a waitress? How embarrassing." But Clara didn't realize that while most guests avoided her eyes, one pair of eyes remained fixed on her, sharp as steel. Reynolds's silence was louder than words. He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable, but inside, he was disgusted. Humiliation of character, Clara's arrogance, and Elena's quiet resilience. Meanwhile, behind the golden doors of the ballroom, Elena leaned against the cold wall of the service corridor. Her breath came in shaky gasps. She looked down at her uniform, the red stain spreading like a wound, and a sob escaped her lips before she could stop it. Why? Why did she do that? I didn't do anything wrong. I was careful. I was polite. So why me? Her hands clenched into fists, but then she released them, trembling. She couldn't afford anger. Anger wouldn't pay her brother's school fees. Anger wouldn't feed her mother back home. She wiped her tears quickly, whispering to herself, Stay strong, Elena. Finish the shift. No matter what, don't quit. You need this job. She straightened her back, though her heart felt like it had shattered into pieces. And as she stood there, trying to gather the courage to return, the doors behind her creaked open. A shadow fell across the dim hallway. Elena froze. Back in the hall, Reynolds rose from his seat. Clara noticed him standing and smiled, assuming he was coming to praise her or join her circle. But his footsteps didn't move toward her. They moved toward the service door Elena had disappeared through. Clara's smile faltered. "Where's he going?" she muttered to her friend. "There's nothing interesting back there." But Reynolds didn't answer. His tall figure slipped out of sight, leaving Clara frowning, unaware that her cruel joke had just set into motion events she could not control. Because Reynolds was not a man who ignored injustice. And what he had seen tonight was something he would not forget. In that single choice, to follow the waitress instead of joining the governor's daughter, Reynolds silently declared where his loyalty, his respect, and his interest truly lay. And the consequences of that decision were about to change the lives of everyone in that hall. It wasn't just about the wine. It was about dignity, about respect, about the little pride she had carried into the gala, only to have it ripped away in front of hundreds of eyes. Why me? She thought desperately. Why did she choose me? What did I do wrong? Her hands shook as she tried to rub the stain, but the deep red mark only smeared further. She let out a frustrated sigh, pressing her forehead into her palm. I can't go back out there. They'll laugh again. I'll just be the clumsy waitress who ruined her own dress. The door behind her creaked open. Elena stiffened, quickly wiping at her eyes. She didn't want anyone to see her like this. Not her supervisor, not another server, and certainly not one of the wealthy guests. But when she turned, she froze. It wasn't a fellow staff member. It wasn't Clara, returning to taunt her again. It was Mr. Reynolds. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, he looked entirely out of place in the narrow, dim hallway. His presence filled the space with quiet authority, though his expression was softened by something unexpected, concern. For a moment, Elena panicked. Why was he here? Was he going to scold her too? Would he tell her she had embarrassed the event? Quickly, she bowed her head. I'm sorry, sir. I'll get out of the way. I didn't mean to... Stop. His voice was calm but firm. Not the sharp command of someone used to power, but the steady tone of someone who wanted to be heard. Eleanor froze. Reynolds stepped closer, his eyes studying her carefully. He saw the trembling in her hands, the redness in her eyes, the ruined uniform she tried to hide with folded arms. You didn't do anything wrong, he said quietly. Eleanor blinked in shock. Of all the words she expected, those were the last. Sir, she whispered, confused. I watched what happened, Reynolds explained, his voice low but steady. You didn't spill the wine. Clara did. On purpose. Elena's lips parted in disbelief. No one else had defended her. No one else had dared contradict Clara. And yet, this man, a man she recognized as one of the most powerful guests at the gala, had not only seen the truth, but spoken it. Her eyes filled again, but this time not with humiliation, with relief. Thank you, she stammered. But please don't say anything. I can't afford to lose this job. If the governor's daughter complains, Her voice broke. I need this. Reynolds studied her, his sharp gaze softening. There was no greed in her eyes, no hidden agenda, only raw honesty, desperation, and strength holding her fragile dignity together. You're worried about your job? He asked gently. Elena nodded, swallowing hard. My brother... He's in school. The fees are due. My mother is sick. I can't risk losing this, no matter what they say about me." Her words struck Reynolds deeply. Most people in that hall boasted about wealth, power, and deals. But here was a young woman who carried burdens far heavier than her uniform suggested, and yet she still smiled politely, still worked with grace. "You don't deserve what happened out there," he said after a long pause. "No one does, and I promise you, this won't be the end of your story tonight." Elena looked up, startled. His words carried a weight she didn't understand. But before she could reply, the door creaked again. This time it wasn't Reynolds's tall figure filling the doorway. It was Clara. She had followed Reynolds out of curiosity, wondering why he had left the ballroom. When she saw him standing there with Elena, her eyes narrowed. "What's this?" she said sharply, her voice dripping with disdain. "Why are you wasting your time on her?" Elena flinched, instinctively stepping back. Reynolds, however, didn't move. His expression hardened, though his voice remained calm. "I don't think this is any of your concern, Clara." Clara laughed, a high, mocking sound. "Of course it is. She's staff. She's supposed to serve, not cry in hallways and waste everyone's time. Honestly, Mr. Reynolds, I'm surprised. A man of your position, talking to someone like her?" Her tone carried disbelief, even disgust. Reynolds's eyes sharpened. He rarely allowed emotion to surface in public, but Clara's arrogance was beginning to test his patience. Still, he said nothing. He didn't need to. Not yet. Clara, mistaking his silence for agreement, smirked. "Don't worry. I'll make sure she's replaced. My father listens to me. People like her shouldn't be here anyway." With a flick of her hair, Clara turned and strutted back into the ballroom, convinced she had ended the matter. Elena's shoulders slumped. She looked at Reynolds, her voice trembling. She'll have me fired. I know it." But Reynolds's gaze remained steady. "Trust me," he said quietly. "Clara isn't as untouchable as she believes." Back in the ballroom, Clara rejoined her circle of friends. She boasted loudly about how she had taught the waitress a lesson and hinted that the girl would likely be dismissed before the night was over. Her friends laughed nervously, pretending to admire her boldness, but whispers began to ripple among other guests. Some exchanged uneasy looks. Others muttered that Clara had gone too far. Yet still, no one dared confront her directly. No one, except the man she least expected. Because Reynolds, still standing in the corridor with Elena, had already made a decision. In that quiet moment, as Elena tried to gather herself once more, Reynolds gently handed her a folded handkerchief. "Wipe your tears," he said softly. "You'll need to walk back out there soon. Hold your head high, not because of them, but because you know your worth." Elena clutched the handkerchief, stunned by his kindness. For the first time that night, a fragile flicker of hope lit her chest. She didn't understand why this powerful man cared. She didn't know what he planned, but his words wrapped around her like armor. And as the orchestra swelled inside the ballroom, one truth settled over the night. The humiliation Clara had unleashed was about to bring consequences she never imagined. The governor's gala was at its peak. The orchestra played louder, the chandeliers glowed brighter, and laughter echoed through the grand ballroom. Deals were being whispered over glasses of champagne, cameras flashed, and speeches about generosity and community pride rolled off the tongues of powerful men. But beneath the surface, tension rippled like an invisible current. Clara returned to her circle of friends, glowing with self-satisfaction. She recounted the clumsy waitress incident with animated hand gestures, painting herself as the victim who had been nearly knocked over. Her voice was filled with arrogance as she declared, "Daddy won't allow this kind of incompetence. I'll make sure she never works here again." Her friends giggled nervously, but their eyes betrayed discomfort. They weren't laughing because they found it funny. They were laughing because they were afraid not to. Across the hall, Whispers began spreading. Guests who had witnessed the incident shook their heads quietly. Some muttered about Clara's immaturity, while others noted the governor's unfortunate blind spot when it came to his daughter's behavior. Still, no one dared confront her directly. No one, except one man. At the edge of the ballroom, Mr. Reynolds re-entered. His tall figure cut through the crowd with calm authority. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were sharp, observant, and deliberate. The weight of his presence made even the boldest guests lower their voices. The governor himself, Governor Harrington, spotted him and hurried over. A broad smile spread across his face as he extended his hand. "Mr. Reynolds, I was hoping to catch you. I trust everything is to your liking tonight. The food, the entertainment. We are honored to have you here." Reynolds shook his hand firmly, but did not smile. "The arrangements are impressive," he said slowly, his tone carrying layers the governor did not immediately understand. "But there are other matters I wish to discuss with you. Privately." The governor raised an eyebrow but nodded quickly. When Alexander Reynolds requested a word, you gave it. That was the unspoken rule in political and financial circles. Together, they moved toward a quieter corner of the hall, away from curious ears. Once there, Reynolds wasted no time. His voice dropped, steady and deliberate. "Harrington, I've always respected your work, your leadership, and your vision for this state. But tonight, I saw something that troubles me deeply." The governor frowned, immediately concerned. "What is it?" Reynolds' eyes flickered toward Clara, who was still laughing across the hall. "Your daughter." The governor stiffened. "Clara?" "Yes." Reynolds' gaze hardened. "I watched her deliberately humiliate one of the waitresses. She spilled wine on the girl's dress and then mocked her in front of everyone. It was cruel, unnecessary, and unbecoming, not just for her, but for your household." For a moment, silence fell between them. The governor's face tightened. "Are you certain?" he asked carefully, his voice a mixture of disbelief and discomfort. "I don't make accusations lightly," Reynolds replied coldly. "I saw it with my own eyes. Clara orchestrated it, then laughed as the girl cried in the hallway. If this is how she represents your family in public, then you should be very concerned, because believe me, others noticed too." The governor's heart sank. His reputation, carefully built over decades of service, depended on the image of integrity, discipline, and fairness. If word spread that his daughter was cruel and entitled, it could undo years of work. He glanced again at Clara, who twirled her wineglass, oblivious to the storm building. "This is unacceptable," he muttered under his breath. "I had no idea she—" He cut himself off, shame burning in his chest. He was the governor, yet in his own house, his daughter had embarrassed him in front of the most powerful man in the room. Reynolds leaned closer, his voice like steel. "Harrington, I value our alliance. But understand this. Tonight, I saw more dignity in that waitress than in your daughter. If you allow this kind of behavior to go unaddressed, it won't just stain her reputation. It will stain yours." The governor's hands clenched at his sides. His pride warred with his duty, but Reynolds's words pierced the truth. He had no choice. "Where is the girl now?" Harrington asked quietly. "She's in the service corridor," Reynolds replied, trying to hide her tears. The governor's jaw tightened. Without another word, he turned and strode toward Clara. Clara's smile widened when she saw her father approaching. "Daddy," she said sweetly, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "You should have seen it. The waitress was so clumsy she spilled wine all over herself. I told her off, of course. Honestly, people like that don't belong at events like this." Her friends laughed nervously, their eyes darting between father and daughter. But the governor's expression was cold, his voice sharp. "Clara, a word. Now." The laughter died instantly. The entire group froze. Clara blinked, taken aback. Her father's tone was not the gentle, indulgent one she was used to. It was hard, commanding, laced with disappointment. "Daddy, what's wrong?" she whispered, her smile faltering. "Now," Harrington repeated, his voice like thunder. The room went silent as he led Clara toward the corner where Reynolds stood. Guests pretended to continue their conversations, but their eyes followed the pair. Everyone sensed something was about to happen. When they reached Reynolds, Clara's confidence returned slightly. She batted her eyelashes at him, her voice dripping with false charm. "Mr. Reynolds, I hope that silly waitress hasn't been bothering you. Honestly, she was—" "Enough!" Reynolds's voice cut through her words like a blade. His eyes burned with authority, and Clara's smile froze. Her father's face was dark with shame. "Clara, Mr. Reynolds saw what you did. He told me everything. Is it true?" Clara's mouth opened and closed. For the first time that evening, she faltered. I don't know what he told you, but she was clumsy." "Do not lie to me." The governor's voice thundered so loudly that heads turned across the hall. "Did you spill that wine on her? Did you mock her afterward?" The color drained from Clara's face. She glanced at Reynolds, then at her father, realizing both men knew the truth. For once, her arrogance couldn't save her. I was just joking," she stammered weakly. "It wasn't serious. She's just staff." "Staff!" the governor snapped, his voice filled with fury. "That young woman was working honestly, with dignity, while you disgraced this household with cruelty. Do you understand the shame you've brought on me tonight? On yourself?" Tears welled in Clara's eyes, but not from remorse, from fear. She had never seen her father this angry, not in public, not in front of so many witnesses. Reynolds's voice cut through again, calm but devastating. "She doesn't yet realize the gravity of her actions. But you do, Harrington. And you know what must be done." The governor closed his eyes briefly, his chest heavy. When he opened them, his gaze was firm. "You will apologize," he told Clara coldly. "Not in private, not whispered. You will apologize to that young woman in front of every guest here. Tonight." Clara gasped, horror flashing across her face. "What? No. Daddy, I can't." "You can, and you will," Harrington snapped. "Or you will learn what it means to live without the privileges you've taken for granted. Do you understand me?" The room around them buzzed with whispers as guests leaned closer, pretending not to listen but unable to look away. Clara's chest tightened with panic. She had always believed she was untouchable, shielded by her father's power and wealth. But now, with Mr. Reynolds's unyielding eyes upon her and her father's fury burning, she realized she had overstepped. And for the first time in her life, Clara Harrington understood what it meant to face consequences. The grand ballroom buzzed with uneasy whispers. The governor's raised voice still hung in the air like thunder, leaving every guest on edge. The orchestra had softened, uncertain whether to continue playing. Laughter had vanished, replaced by the heavy silence of anticipation. Everyone's eyes followed Governor Harrington and Clara, wondering what would happen next. Some secretly relished the drama. Rarely did the elite see the mighty family falter in public. Others were simply stunned, whispering under their breath, "Did you hear? She humiliated one of the waitresses." Reynolds saw it himself. The governor looks furious. Clara's confidence had cracked. She stood beside her father, her face pale, her hands trembling. She had never been so exposed, so vulnerable, so powerless. She looked around, searching for a sympathetic face, but all she saw were eyes full of judgment, or worse, disappointment. The governor's voice cut through the tension, cold and commanding. "Bring the young woman here." The order sent a ripple across the room. A supervisor rushed to the service corridor and soon returned with Eleanor. She walked hesitantly, her head bowed, her stained uniform still clinging to her like a badge of shame. She hadn't wanted to come back. Every part of her wanted to hide. But Reynolds's quiet encouragement had given her enough strength to face the room again. When she stepped into the hall, the whispers grew louder. Guests turned their heads, some pitying, others curious. Elena's heart pounded in her chest. Why am I here? What more humiliation must I endure? But then she saw Reynolds across the room, standing tall, his eyes locked on hers. He gave her the smallest nod, steady, reassuring, like an anchor in a storm. She took a deep breath and moved forward. Clara's heart sank when she saw Elena walking toward them. No, not in front of everyone. Daddy can't make me. But the governor's voice left no room for argument. Clara, now! Clara shook her head, her eyes wide with disbelief. Daddy, please, now! The ballroom went silent, every ear straining to catch what would happen next. Clara swallowed hard, her pride warring with her fear. Slowly, stiffly, she turned toward Elena. Her voice cracked as she forced out the words, I'm sorry. It was barely a whisper, weak and unconvincing. Guests frowned, unimpressed. Louder, her father demanded. So every guest here hears you. Clara's cheeks burned with shame. She wanted to scream, to cry, to run, but she could do none of those things. She looked at Elena, her lips trembling. I'm sorry for what I did, she said louder, though her tone was hollow. I shouldn't have spilled the wine. I shouldn't have mocked you. Elena stood frozen, her eyes wide. She never imagined she would hear an apology from the governor's daughter. Not here, not in front of the elite. But the governor wasn't finished. Clara, you will also thank her, he commanded. Clara's jaw dropped. What? You will thank her for showing you tonight the importance of humility, he said sternly. For without this moment, you would continue down a path of arrogance that will destroy you. Clara's throat tightened. Her pride screamed against it, but her father's eyes blazed with authority. With a trembling voice, she forced the words out. Thank you. The room buzzed again, shocked whispers rising. The mighty Clara Harrington, the untouchable daughter of the governor, had just been humbled before a waitress. Elena's hands shook at her sides. She didn't know what to say, her mind spinning. She wanted to forgive, but the humiliation still burned in her memory. Yet she also knew the entire hall was waiting for her response. So, with a steadying breath, she lifted her chin. Her voice was soft but clear, carrying more strength than anyone expected. I accept your apology, she said, and I hope you never treat anyone else the way you treated me. No one deserves that. The hall fell silent again, but this time it was out of respect. Elena, in her stained uniform, had spoken with more dignity than the governor's daughter. Reynolds' lips curved ever so slightly, a rare expression of approval. She has more grace than half this room combined, he thought. The governor nodded firmly, his shame heavy but his resolve clear. This matter is settled. Clara will reflect on her behavior. And as for you, he turned to Eleanor, his tone softening. You have my deepest apologies. Tonight should never have gone this way. Eleanor bowed her head slightly, overwhelmed. But the story didn't end there. As the guests slowly returned to their conversations, Reynolds stepped forward. All eyes turned to him. When Alexander Reynolds spoke, people listened. I'd like to add something, he said, his deep voice commanding the room's attention. He glanced at Elena, then back at the governor. This young woman showed more poise under humiliation than many people show in comfort. She deserves not just an apology, but an opportunity. The governor frowned, curious. What do you mean, Reynolds? Reynolds smiled faintly. I run a foundation for young professionals. Scholarships, internships, training programs. We search for those with potential, determination, and dignity. Tonight, I believe I've found someone who fits all three. Gasps echoed through the crowd. All eyes snapped to Elena. Her own eyes widened in shock. Me? But I'm just a waitress. Reynolds shook his head. No, you are much more than that. You worked with grace, endured humiliation with dignity, and still carried yourself with honor. That speaks louder than wealth or titles. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She felt her knees weaken, but she steadied herself, her heart racing. Sir, I don't know what to say. Say yes, Reynolds replied simply. Tears filled Elena's eyes again, but this time they were tears of gratitude, not shame. She nodded, her voice trembling. Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. The room erupted in murmurs, some astonished, some admiring. A few clapped quietly, moved by the unexpected turn of events. Clara stood frozen, her world crumbling. In her attempt to humiliate Elena, she had not only embarrassed herself, but had handed Elena the very spotlight she had wanted to steal. Her lips trembled as she turned to her father. Daddy, you can't let him. But her father cut her off with a glare. Silence, Clara. This is the consequence of your actions. Learn from it. Clara's eyes burned with tears. For the first time in her life, she was not the center of admiration, but the subject of shame. The gala slowly returned to its rhythm, but nothing was the same. Whispers of the night's events would spread across the city, carried into headlines and conversations. People would talk about how the governor's daughter had been humbled, and how a waitress had walked away with dignity and opportunity. Elena left the ballroom with her head higher than when she entered. The red stain on her dress no longer felt like humiliation. It felt like a symbol of the storm she had survived. At the exit, Reynolds walked beside her. Tonight was only the beginning, he said quietly. You have potential, Elena. Don't ever let anyone convince you otherwise. She looked at him with gratitude shining in her eyes. I'll never forget what you did for me. Reynolds shook his head. No. Remember what you did. You held your dignity when others would have crumbled. That's your strength. Never lose it. Eleanor smiled through her tears. For the first time in years, hope filled her chest. Not fragile hope, but solid, unshakable hope. As the mansion's golden lights faded behind her, she whispered to herself, "This is my new beginning."